This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Parker, the financial stack designed to help e-commerce brands scale with a focus on profitability. Whether you're just starting out or scaling your store to 100 million, Parker offers a unique corporate card with limits up to 10 to 20x higher than traditional business cards, thanks to their performance-based underwriting. Plus, you'll get a true credit period on every swipe with rolling payback terms up to 90 days. Parker has already processed over $1 billion in transactions for hundreds of brands across apparel, luxury goods, wellness, beauty, food and beverage to help them scale. So join brands like Caraway, Oats Overnight, and Obvi, and visit parker.com today to get your application started. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined today in his Jack Henry shirt, Mr. Taylor Holiday, who's the CEO here at Common Thread Collective. Taylor, what's going on today?
This is my I'm recording content shirt.
Excellent.
This is a fun story. I met this human who is like a self-proclaimed content guru that has all these like
Okay.
theories into the algorithms of TikTok and Instagram and these places. And he says that one of them is that they basically divide all visuals into blue and red. And so if you wear blue or red, that like it tends to get favored in the algorithm. And there's people that consume certain color variations without them being conscious of it. And I was like, well, I don't know if I believe you at all, but I will wear a blue shirt for fun.
Huh.
Today's about creative testing. And so this is like a fun theoretical theory on creative testing is like, does the blue shirt matter in your content consumption?
Well, I'm going to say I got the Greg Norman shark shirt. I'd like to think that the algorithm prefers those, but all right, folks. Well, yeah. So as you've alluded to, we're talking about creative testing today. We've been talking about creative a lot recently. And part of the impetus for this particular conversation is a little mini Twitter firestorm, I guess, the other day that brought on by Andrew Ferris talking about his creative testing methodology, which is, of course, very controversial because it involves, as I understand it, essentially dumping all ads into a single campaign with a single CBO or a single budget rather, and then letting the algorithm just do all the work in terms of finding the winners and losers. And of course, this caused a lot of pushback in terms of people talking about like, hey, you'll never get top of funnel ads will never perform. You're never going to get a new ad to work. It's just all going to be DPAs that win, all that type of thing. And I think what we wanted to do today was sort of insert ourselves into this conversation and talk about what we do at Common Thread Collective. So, and particularly how the way we think about creative testing has changed, I would say a lot in the last few years, and the way we approach it with our larger 9-figure plus brands. So Taylor, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of what happened on Twitter and how you sort of waded into it and got involved with this?
Yeah. So Andrew posts about that he believes that using CBO and cost controls is the best way to creative test. And then the very common counter argument to this is that cost controls suppress spend. You don't get enough budget on new creative tests, and therefore you don't learn anything, or you don't have the opportunity to unlock new higher levels of performance off of the new creative that you're testing because they're being suppressed by cost control. Andrew is providing a counterpoint to that. And I think all of it is just sort of inconsequential. I think that Andrew's strategy is certainly the best for profit maximization. Some brands aren't always looking to do that and they have broader initiatives. And so maybe you could do something else, but I don't find the argument to be the most interesting thing. And I actually think that what we do is probably pretty distinct from both of them in that we do not have a single campaign in a meta account that we've created that's labeled creative testing. Like there is no process for us by which we go from like, this is a campaign where we're testing creative and then we move it into a winners campaign. Like we don't do any of that. Every campaign, every day is a creative test against the outcome that we want it to generate a result for. Whether it's been running before or not, or it's brand new, it is a test against the potential result that we want every single day. So I've never really understood the distinction between a campaign labeled creative test and one labeled scale or whatever. And oftentimes I've seen campaign or accounts where it's like the creative testing campaign is spending twice as much as the scaling campaign because the idea that you would turn it off and move it is just absurd. And so people just rename the syntax. So it tends to be this sort of like semantics debate that is like very inconsequential for how I think about how a brand produces growth and scale on the platform, which has almost nothing to do with iterations.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about that, specifically iteration, because our stance on that has changed somewhat, like at the time that I've been here, certainly. And I think, 3, 4, 5 years ago, a lot of the conversation around creative was around the specific granular creative testing of this idea that like, hey, this ad maybe, has a X amount of watch time and people are dropping off at a certain point, but they're not buying. Therefore, what we're not saying is that the entire ad is broken. What we're saying is that maybe the end needs a little bit of a tweak. And this idea seems like it's persisting of doing these sort of constant mini iterations to ads to try to like get a winner, or to take existing evergreen ads and you just sort of tweak them a little bit. But it sounds like what we're saying now is, well, we're taking a completely different tack on that and saying like every single ad we put into account, we're trying to have a hit with. And if it doesn't work, then we just put a new ad in the account altogether. And we don't think of it in terms of these sort of mini iteration. So talk about the way that our thinking, your thinking specifically, has evolved over the last few years when it comes to this particular topic.
The opportunity of getting to work with more mature e-commerce brands is you begin to understand the patterns of behavior that got them to the place that they're at.
Yeah.
And there are certainly exceptions. I think there are probably brands that have like iterative, evergreened their way to big success. But my experience is that's not how most big brands build and drive demand for their product set.
Mhm.
And if you follow CTC, what you'll notice is that the core of marketing and growth planning for us lies in the marketing calendar.
Mhm.
Well, what is a marketing calendar? A marketing calendar is a future forward looking calendar that plans initiatives, product releases, and messaging to meet the moment of the year that the brand is speaking to. And then the goal is to plan out the best possible story that you can across every channel of your business to pull collectively on the rope to drive the best incremental contribution margin and profit that you can over time.
Mhm.
That is a very different system of work than is the idea that next week I'm going to launch a new set of ads and then I'm going to iterate on those and then I'm going to try them again and then I'm going to try them again and I'm going to try them again and I'm going to try them again and I'm going to try them again until I can find the best ad ever. I don't think that's a very effective way to build and scale a brand in 2024.
Right. Because it doesn't take into account, I think, that the actual human behaviors that drive purchase, which is essentially seasonality. And
That's right.
seasonality in the sense too of like, okay, we've created seasonality because by dropping a new product or whatever. It's like people buy because it's the time to buy. And I think like iterating on evergreen ads is there's almost like a very mechanistic, I'm just trying to like put tokens into the machine and see if they'll come back out, rather than thinking about the overall idea of what I'm doing, which is that selling to real people on the other side of this thing.
That you can hold these variables constant such that each time you test them, you learn something
Yeah.
that can be applied in the future. And this is just like such a like hard thing for people to comprehend, that last week's testing results are not predictive of the future results. And the simplest way to illustrate this is I would just encourage you to take the same ad. Just if you want to put me to the test here, take the same ad, okay? Launch it in 2 different campaigns, and you'll see that you get wildly different results, even when you're running them concurrently, let alone if you run one this week and then one next week. Because the reality is everything in the world has changed in a week.
Mhm.
Everything, who it's served to, where it's served, the price of that inventory, the macroeconomic environment, the season, like everything changes all the time.
Mhm.
And so the best thing we can do is to decide how we can tell the most compelling stories, aligning campaign, moment, product in that exact moment to create the best result. And we have an awesome example to share with you
Yeah.
today about what I mean, in the way that this is how you actually transform your business. This is how you drive new incremental levels of demand in your ad account. It is not the 74th headline test of the same product that you've been running. It is not the way. This, what we're going to share right now, is the way.
Okay. So let's do it. Yeah. Let's jump into the example here.
Hey guys, Bear here, co-founder of Born Primitive. We're really excited to announce our newest Savage One, the D-Day edition. A lot of you are tracking, but the 80th anniversary of D-Day is coming up on June 6th. 100% of profits of this shoe, up to $50,000, are going to directly support over 60 World War II veterans who are returning to Normandy for the 80th. This is through the Best Defense Foundation, who's doing great things for our veterans. So wanted to take a quick minute to break this down. We're also going to be having 500 collector's editions that we're going to sell. This is going to come in this wood crate, this ammo can. Of course, it's going to contain the shoes. 6.6, 1944, 0630, Operation Overlord. As you look down at your feet, it says damn few. So when you're hitting those sled pushes, hopefully you get a little extra motivation. American flag on the inside, classic World War II colorway. In addition to that, it's going to come with sand from Omaha Beach. We got permission from the French government to bring this back when they heard about the cause. It's also going to come with this commemorative challenge coin, the Order of the Day from General Eisenhower, and my favorite, it's going to have 6 baseball cards of some of these veterans that are participating in the Battlefield Return Program. So you'll see their picture current day on the front. You flip it over, you can read their bio, the picture of what they looked like when they were just a young buck, and it'll talk about their exploits when they were in the war. It's really humbling to read some of these things, makes you realize what the greatest generation did for us so we have the freedoms we enjoy today. So if this is a cause you want to support, head to bornprimitive.com while supplies last. Thanks so much.
Okay, so we have worked with a customer, Born Primitive, for a long time. Awesome fitness apparel brand that has a very clear, and I would say even narrowing focus on understanding who they are as a business. Okay, their unique value proposition in the world is that they were founded by a Navy SEAL who's incredibly authentic, where he and his partner, Mal, who are both endemic to the CrossFit community, former military, in a way that gives them a deep authenticity in a very specific community, where they developed product and messaging to meet that community where they're at. Okay. So right away, that's true. There's a brand ethos that aligns authentically with a unique community. And since then, they have continued to find ways to develop product that meets the customer in that specific place. So we have had a fantastic year so far for Born Primitive. They are continuing to grow. And one of the ways that they've done that is by product development. So they've recently launched shoes, specifically a CrossFit training shoe, and it has been a big success. It's unlocked new tranches of spend in the ad account for both new customers and existing customers to take advantage of. And as we looked out into the future, they came up with a great idea, which was this year is the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion of Normandy during World War II. Okay. So this starts with cultural brand opportunity to say, wow, this is a really unique thing. And what's happening is there is a bunch of World War II veterans. Now, you got to imagine the 80th anniversary means that these folks are getting up there in age. There aren't likely to be very many more anniversaries where people who were alive at D-Day are able to go back to Normandy to relive that experience and to share in what was obviously one of the most important days in our country's history. So Born Primitive has created what they call a D-Day edition of Savage One. Okay. So they created a product based on this cultural moment. Okay. That saw out into the future that there was an opportunity to tell an incredible story about some of these folks. Then they created within the design of that. So they mass produced a D-Day edition Savage One. Within that, they created 500 limited edition collector's editions that come in a specific box. They've got sand from Normandy. They've got a subset. And of those 500, higher price point, they are going to pay for the travel of those D-Day veterans to go back to this trip. Okay. So they are funding the opportunity for these veterans to go back to this experience through the sale of these shoes. Okay. So you've got charity, you've got alignment to cultural moment, you've got brand authenticity, you've got product. Okay. On the day of the draw on the Normandy D-Day, there are going to be Navy SEALs jumping out of airplanes to land on Normandy. You know what they're wearing? Savage One. Okay. Imagine the content that's going to come out of that moment. Okay. You can picture it. You can imagine how compelling it's going to be. Okay. Now we take that, and you know what also is there? A bunch of cool ad content, Bear telling stories, product images, a very diverse set of creative to reinforce that moment. Okay. Now, as we get ready to launch, you know how much historical ad data I have about click-through rate, CTR? Zero. I have none, and I don't care at all. It's inconsequential to me. Now, you know what's really hard to do? Predict how much volume I'm going to get. So if I were going to set this campaign up on lowest cost, what do I set the budget at? How much demand is there going to be? I don't know. I could guess, and I could set it at lowest cost and try and estimate the volume. But here's the beautiful thing about cost controls, and this is where our testing strategy does begin to overlap with what Andrew's talking about, is we can have an estimation of budget, and we do. Every day we try to predict, okay, we think this campaign is going to spend this much money, and we can set the budget. But you know what we do? We set the actual budget in the platform higher than that, and we use a cost control, a bid cap, to manage that expectation to say, okay, Meta, we don't know how much volume is going to be available for this. It's new to us. But we know the return that we need to be profitable. And so we can turn it on. And what I can tell you is over the last 3 days, we've tripled the expectation of spend. And it's coming all from these ads, not an iteration on our leggings ads, and the account is driving more success than we've seen at any point during the year, unlocking another tranche. While all the other campaigns, guess what? They're still working, still running at the level that they were yesterday. But now we've added on a tranche, highly profitable, incredibly compelling, brand accretive storytelling and product that matches the marketing calendar, that overlaps with product and culture in a way that transforms the future of this month's financial results.
If you're tired of juggling spreadsheets to track your P&L and cash flow, or you're looking for a line of credit to scale your ads, it's time to try Parker. With Parker's integrated banking and analytics platform, you'll gain deeper insight into your business and how to grow profitably. Plus, their generous rolling payback terms on credit mean you can keep working capital in your business for up to 6 times longer. Parker is trusted by top e-commerce brands like Caraway, Oats Overnight, and Obvi to help them scale. Just go to getparker.com or click the link in the description below to get your application started today.
Yeah. That's advertising. That's meta advertising.
Wow. That's beautiful. I love the contrast between the two things we're talking about. Like, we go back to where we started this conversation in Twitter with, Ferris debating with various people. It's like, hey, what do we do? Do we set cost caps here, or do we throw everything into CBO, or actually do we have a creative testing campaign? How do we iterate? And the contrast to your story, which is like, hey, let's go back to June 6th, 1944. The United States is invading Europe to shut down the Nazis or whatever. Like, that's the type of contrast that we're talking about here. It's not about flipping levers and pressing buttons. It's about storytelling, and really it's about product. And maybe I think one thing you can take out of this is that the ad account is meant to serve product, not the other way around. And I feel like it happens the other way around all the time, because product feels more fixed maybe. And so it's like, this is the product. It's just is what it is. Let's try to manipulate the small sort of gradations of this ad in order to get to a point where we can actually sell this or whatever. There's going to be some unlock, but actually the unlock's in the product and the story and the work that happens before the ad is even created.
And this is what I've watched the great brands do, is they don't think about product and marketing and storytelling through the lens of the ad account. The ad account is distribution for the story they are creating.
Yep.
And you've had BG on this episode before. BG just never thought about a Facebook ad account in his life. Like, it's just not part of his planning process when he thinks about Skull Candy's next product. And so I've watched these people with curiosity, because I go, wait a second, like, how do you not think about the distribution of the ad account? It's like, because it's so much bigger than that. They're building a brand that has distribution in retail and storytelling and relationship with customer. And if you do all that right, you know what happens? The ad account runs hyper efficient, because you've created a compelling product that meets the moment with a story that's unique and moves people emotionally. And now all of a sudden you're actually driving disproportionate demand capture and even demand creation for something that is truly unique and novel and cuts through the noise on the ad account.
Yeah. Let's talk about, just because for my own curiosity, as much as anything, like what's the process of the way this has evolved? Because in your own mind and in CTC's methodology as well, because 2-3 years ago, one of the lines was ads don't break parts of ads break, or something like that. The idea that there's ways to salvage evergreen ads by tweaking certain parts of them. We have the ADA metrics. There are all kinds of different ways that we got granular into specifically like how to iterate on evergreen. So talk about maybe how this specifically has evolved for you.
So I have never, if you go back and watch on Shopify right now, they have like a series of lectures, and you can find a piece of content that I taught around ADA, around exactly what you're describing, which is this idea of ads don't break, parts of ads break. And this is what I'll give myself credit for when I look back at that. One is, we have always acknowledged that no individual creative metric, CTR, CPC, CPM, CVR, has a correlation to ROAS. You cannot dissect the individual component of any ad in isolation. But what we talk about in that video is the idea that ADA is a representation of a sequence. It's a hierarchy of metrics by which all of them matter. And the research that we did showed that when 4 of these metrics, so when 4 different components were working together, the impact was those ads tend to have higher performance. And so the idea was to think about your ads as a part of a collective experience of a user, where they have to stop, they have to watch it, then they have to have a desire to click on it, then they have to convert ultimately to purchase. And no one metric matters, but the relationship of all of them could. And so that was what we wanted to find. We wanted to try and find some data driven connection to these creative metrics. But I'll tell you, it's really hard to actually find that data bear out anywhere. And this is my challenge to us as a creative industry beyond CTC is that, like, I just think we have a more of an obligation to evidence for our theories than we're putting forward right now.
Yeah.
And in the creative world in particular, I think there is minimal evidence that these sorts of patterns of behavior actually produce better future results. And I think the thing that Andrew's getting at is I think we waste a lot of money in the name of generating creative learnings that don't actually lead to better future creative performance over time. And if you look at the Outlier series I'm doing right now, I think that for some of the best brands in the world, you see that the reality remains true that most ads don't work. And so it takes a lot because you know what's really hard to win at this game, to drive compelling story, to drive through the results that produce profit. If it were easy to do, there'd be way more profitable brands than there are. And so this is the other thing I'll say is that for all of you out there talking about how easy it is, and if you're just good, you can make good creative results. I would just say if that were true, there would be way more profitable brands in this space than there are.
Yeah. I think one thing that comes to mind is when you're talking about particularly the ad account as a form of distribution and some other things, it's like, I think it goes back to an Ogilvy quote that we would often pull out in our ad philosophy course, which is that he says, I don't regard advertising as an art form. I regard it as a medium of information. And of course, what he's pushing back against is people who are trying to, create beautiful ads that don't actually sell anything. But then there's also the flip side of it, which is people that are just, again, pressing buttons in the ad account, thinking of the ad account as the thing, rather than it only being like, this is a set of billboards that you're allowed to put in front of people. And if the thing that you're selling is in and of itself interesting, the amount of work you have to do to make it interesting on the creative side is actually pretty minimal, I would think. All you have to do is say, hey, we're having Navy SEALs jump out of planes at Normandy, and they're going to be wearing this thing. And we've already done all this brand building and brand equity creation in the back end or whatever. And so all you have to do is just tell people that it's happening. And the actual creative execution becomes less important because the product itself it's so dialed in beforehand, I guess.
That's right. I mean, you could unbox some products, right? Like, and then you could unbox this product and you could show a static single frame video of both occurring, and one is way more compelling than the other. And so again, so this is why product as marketing is so important, but it's not, in this case, it's not just the product, it's the story. It's the connection between story and marketing. And there's a great follow. I think I've referenced him on this podcast before, a guy by the name of Jordan Rogers that does this breakdown of Nike content. And he talks about this all the time, how the magic of that brand was always the overlap between the athlete, the cultural moment, and the product. And that getting all of those things right at the same time is actually the key to driving these disproportionate, incredible marketing campaigns. It's that if you can align that, the person, the moment, and the product all together, now you can create really, really impactful results. And I think that is where so many brands need to take a step back and think like, what is it that I'm saying versus like hoping that the color cut on the first frame of my video is going to entice people, because that may have some impact for a very short window of time, but those effects wear off very quickly. And now you're stuck trying to hamster wheel the next one versus moving backwards and building something of substance that really has a chance to create better outcome.
Yeah. And I think like wasting energy on, maybe if you iterate in such a way that like the first frame is blue rather than white, you will get some incremental benefit, but the amount of energy wasted on putting that together is like the opportunity of that is way less than actually just going back and thinking about next month's marketing calendar and telling the stories that are going to come up in the following month and that time.
And the problem too is that, yes, we could create a bunch of variants, because I think an easy pushback is here, Taylor. Okay, cool. Well, like, how many ads did you create for the shoe? And aren't you going to iterate on those ads? And what I'll say is like, we will create more ads in the future, but it is far less likely that what we're going to do is try and change a headline from blue to white or red to green. We're going to try a more diverse format in a different style way before we're going to try and just iterate on the image. And I don't even here's my thing is like, I don't really care if iteration is the easiest and shortest path to more quality shots on goal, then cool. My problem is the people who assert the blue and white thing and then go, therefore blue will be better than white. And so therefore all ads should be blue over white. That's the problem for me, where we assert not to tell people what occurred. This ad worked better than that one. It's the why, and then the therefore that the lying starts. And
Right.
that's to me where I express most of my frustration.
Yeah. No, I think I remember you even saying, like, this was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. We were asking the question of, like, when one piece of creative wins, what have we learned about that piece of creative? And really, I think you said, like, all we have learned is that at this time, this ad worked better than this one. But because time is inevitably, it marches on, if you test it the next week, the big variable change is that it's now the next week. And as you were pointing out earlier in this conversation, like, the whole world has changed around you as you've been making this. And so, like, the idea that that'll result in something predictable the next week is maybe, I mean, it sort of works to some extent, I guess, but, like, building an entire creative testing framework around that doesn't make sense, maybe.
Well, if you think about, like, let's just think about what process demands, okay, before we can say something is true. Okay. It would be you have a hypothesis and you provide a test and you get to a result. Then what's the next stage in the scientific community? It's peer review and replication, right?
Mhm.
So now it has to be true that I ran a test, I introduced how it was ran, I hand it to somebody else, and they can replicate it and get the same result. Then that happens multiple times, and out of that, we begin to develop then more certainty. We get from like
Mhm.
a hypothesis to theory. And that's why so few things actually make it to law, is because the actual replication is a massive problem in even the most constrained sets of scientific environments. Our world is full of incredibly dynamic, always changing, never the same variable. And
Mhm.
so there's a huge replication problem with any creative hypothesis. And so that's the challenge that I have for the way that we talk about this stuff, is that until you can show me replication and consistency of a result over time, I don't I will hold it in the realm of hypothesis that maybe someday I would go test again, but I will not assert it to be true. And I think that's the problem that I
Mhm.
have for the way that most people talk about
Okay, so I have a very specific question that maybe people in our audience might have right now, which is that let's say, most brands' ability to, let's say, hire a bunch of World War II vets to go to Normandy and then have a bunch of Navy SEALs jump out of planes is limited. Like, that's not something that is, by its nature, it's not replicable. That's very specific to Born Primitive, obviously very specific to this time of year.
That's part of the point, by the way.
Yeah.
The
Well,
lack of
no,
replication and the uniqueness is actually
I agree.
really important to understand.
Now, but let's say you have a product. So maybe is what you're saying is, like, whatever product you're selling, are you trying to get to a story that is that
Yes,
sort of
that's right.
in depth? And
What can you
again,
say?
yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So what if it's a product that doesn't necessarily lend itself to something that's that sort of epic, I guess. So let's say, for instance, I'm selling, or actually, the kind of thing that got me thinking about this was, like, what we're leaving out of this conversation is, like, let's say Dr. Squatch, the ads themselves being the thing that, because they're so attention grabbing and they're so good, it brings people's attention to a product that maybe is not that different from other products, but people have to buy soap or whatever. So they ended up choosing Dr. Squatch because of the ads. I think that's sort of maybe the fantasy world people live in. But talk to me about that, I guess.
Well, my argument would be that Dr. Squatch built that in at the brand level, and then
Mhm.
therefore the corresponding product level that enabled them to speak and act a certain way,
Totally. Yeah.
right? Dr. Squatch, the logo is a Yeti in a robe. When we started the premise, we started from an exceptional idea of how we were going to present ourselves. I'm using we theoretically, like I didn't do it,
Sure.
they did it. Point is that from the very beginning, I think about this like I think Manscaped is an example like this, right? Where
Mhm.
from the beginning, they built into the ethos of the DNA of the brand that the advertising would be exceptional and really on the nose. Hims is another example like this, where I think
Yeah.
it was like, we're going to talk about erectile dysfunction, and that's going to cut through the noise, and we're going to do it in a way that's very direct. That's who
Mhm.
we are as a brand. And so I think the exceptionalism is built into the DNA of how they're designed the product from the very beginning.
Right.
And I think that is very hard to extract out of a brand that built a very average DNA and just
Yeah.
didn't consider that from the start. I'll give you an example is we used to work with a brand called Bodden. Okay. And
Yeah.
I'll say this on the podcast because I've said it to them before. And if you go meet them, it is a family run business with awesome humans. Is it Seattle? Just outside the
Yep.
Seattle area.
In Seattle, yeah.
And their office is full of like a culture that reflects that. Let's just say like
Mhm.
it's not innovative scientific testing, like pushing the boundaries of science innovation there. And so as they go forward with their brand ethos, it would be very hard for them to use innovation as the primary thing that's in their ads. It's just not true necessarily. Like, and so I think there is this thing where understanding what is uniquely true about you is an important thing to ask yourself when you're telling a story about the brand.
Mhm.
And to really find out what can I only say? Like there are, for me, I'll tell you, I think about this with my own content.
Mhm.
What can I say that no one else in the world can say? Well, there's a very small Venn diagram of people who were former professional athletes, now working in e-commerce. So the overlap of those stories and worlds is pretty novel and unique to a subset of people. It's not zero, but it's like not that many people in those
Mhm.
Venn diagrams. Now you layer in like, okay, who has done that plus managed an agency for 10 years and can speak to the overlap of those three things? Well, again, pretty small group of people who this week I put out a tweet about someone who's managed a business in office, remote, and hybrid. Well, I've done all three of those things. There's a novel story that again, it's not zero people, but it's a small number of people who can tell stories like that. All the time, you should be asking yourself, what unique thing is uniquely true about me as a business such that I could say it, no one else could, in a way that might differentiate me from the rest of the world?
Yeah. I think, my favorite example of this, and maybe you already mentioned it, is Liquid Death, because part of their identity, and this is like a little bit sort of under the radar maybe, but they do say it on the page, I think, is that like they're all marketers who wanted to start a brand where they were allowed to do all the things that they were not allowed to do. Working for agencies, working for other clients, making only insane choices essentially on the marketing side. You know, obviously naming water Liquid Death and mango chainsaw being one of the names of the flavors or whatever. And then having that sort of fundamental thing, like this is just the product is just water. Like the sparkling waters are pretty good, but ultimately the product is replicable, let's say. But the brand itself from the very bottom to the top is built around this combination of saying, like, yes, we know that the product is water, but what we're doing is combining it with the imagery that makes it seem like a cool beer slash the language around the thing that gives you life being like branded around death, which is insane, but it works. And just like, even if the product itself isn't particularly unique, they've baked this story into it from the jump that then plays out in everything else that they do on the ad level.
And that's where I just go like, there's this weird sort of obsession that like the mechanism to the next great ad is like look at your competitors or
Yeah.
iterate off of your historical ads in a way that I'm like, well, that's like a replication towards sameness. That's like the
Mhm.
same idea played out. It's like, oh, somebody else did posted ads, so I'll do posted ads. Is like a very odd marketer's mindset for me of
Mhm.
like that is the mechanism by which what it is it's an attempt at arbing a diminishing return,
Yeah.
which is that as something gets distributed broadly, its impact diminishes, like from an idea standpoint. And so you are trying to stand in the gap of the short period of time before it disappears
Yeah.
versus trying to create the next great idea or to say something that is truly purple cow, Seth Godin, like in a way that allows you to be the thing that people remember over time. And I just look at the, again, just to go back to this more primitive thing, I go, is their customer going to remember a story because I changed the color on a headline or changed up the hook or so that the beat matched the cut perfectly and I sort of played on their psychology to get them deeper into the ad, to draw the watch rate up, to get a click through rate? Or are they going to remember this story where they actually like impacted the real world?
Mhm.
This is like another thing is that like there's a whole real world of things that are happening out there that
Yeah.
you could be a part of that isn't just this sort of manufactured engagement. And I think that is like a challenge for brands too, is like go actually out and impact the world, impact
Mhm.
people in their community and where they are such that they tell stories about it. I think is where we should press more for.
Yeah. Okay, so that's an epic charge from you, Taylor. Like how what do you suggest people go and do right now when it comes to thinking about their marketing calendar, thinking about creative, thinking about how they approach this stuff?
Yeah. So like again, it's pedantic, I know, but it's so real, is that do you have a marketing calendar, and how interesting are the things written on it?
Mhm.
And could you, what if instead of this month trying to iterate on the next 30 ads, you looked out a little further? You went out 60 days from now and you said, what's a story that overlaps with a moment? What's happening in 60 days? Oh, it's the Olympics. It's,
Mhm.
the middle, it's August, it's back to school. It's whatever cultural tenet that people care about already. What could you say in the midst of that? What societal cause could you impact? What
Mhm.
thing could you, or like, institutionally affect in some way? And what if you started planning a little further out and you made the story deeper and richer and you got a partner involved and you found a product offer that really matched to it, and you thought about how it would show up in email and organic social and on your website and on paid social all at the same time? Not so that those channels were competing with one another, but so that they were all affecting the goal together.
Mhm.
And you actually did that work ahead of time. What could you come up with? And I think that would be the challenge to do as a department, is that it's really hard when you're on the hamster wheel. When this week something else has to happen, it has to happen. And I empathize with that. We're on it in many cases ourselves. We are not perfect at this. And in many cases, we don't even get to control this. We didn't come up with the Born Primitive story. Their team did.
Mhm.
In fairness to them, that was them. They created that story. But for us, as the partner that gets to distribute it and thinks about impact, we want to encourage people into that kind of space as much as possible.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, moral of the story is to think ahead a couple of months rather than just working on the current week, which again is incredibly difficult to do. And that's something that we understand. But it's profoundly important to take time to slow down and make those plans, I think. That was part of the sort of push behind our workshop that we had last week, where we talked about how important it is to develop a set of ideas first before you start thinking about the creative execution. That's also why we provided the marketing calendar in that session as well. But Taylor, anything else? Any other points you want to make? Anything else you want to hit on this topic?
I don't want people to miss that there is actually tactical excellence in terms of
Yeah.
understanding what role cost controls play and allowing for you to take advantage of variable media components. This is like so important. Stop guessing at the volume.
Yeah.
Define the expectation of efficiency and allow the market to dictate you the potential for the product to sell. And then you'll learn along the way about what the actual demand potential is versus constantly daily having to interject and guess at it. So
Yeah.
it's really important. Go check it out. Go to bornprimitive.com, follow the story, sign up for the email, look through it, go look in the ad account. You'll see the results. And I can tell you, it's making a meaningful business in. And so this is the way I would encourage you to think as much as possible and free yourself from the endless pursuit of trying to create a 99th percentile outcome off of an iteration.
Awesome. All right, folks, go forth and tell your story, and we will see you all next week. Bye bye.